Today we're going to be talking a little bit about Korean English and some linguistic variants within Korean English. First, some overarching questions that have been key to current research. Number one, how does grammatical encoding take place? This is in production. And then the follow-up to that is, are there multiple stages of this grammatical encoding? There are two things that scholars continue to ask. It's interesting because there's really little sociolinguistic research conducted on either Asian American, much less Korean, and so there's not a ton to draw off of, but those have been two of the overarching ones. Real quick, obviously we've seen this before, but I just want to reiterate that we have our inner, outer, and Korea actually falls not even in inner or outer, it's in unexpansive, so that comes into play because even though in everyday life, Korean kids receive at least 6 years of instruction during their education. English is not, first off, it's not an official language. It's not even a language that is really of use or that is harnessed in a social setting. So within industry or school or even everyday life, it's not a need. And so because of that, it's got a lot of hip hop and fun and just kind of diverting, I guess, kind of uses attached to it, and that'll come into play as we talk about it later. Over here, I've outlined some of the common characteristics, just a few of them, of Korean English. One thing they do is they have the omission of the R sound. So, for example, you say the sentence, hello, how are you? They'd say, hello, how are you? You kind of stereotypically hear how you've heard people pronounce that before. Then, continuing with that R, the L and the R have two things. A lot of times they're ambiguous in their pronunciation, so they're just not quite defined like they are for a native speaker. And then also the reversal. So in this case, something like really becomes leery. And that's obviously got a huge definition difference, but really and leery are very often interchanged. The last one is the I, this is the it versus the I sound. So you have pit and peat, for example. In English, obviously those are two separate vowel cases and contrastive, but there is no contrast between the two in Korean because they only have that high front tense vowel, the it, and so that's something that's quite different for a Korean speaker. Going back to that hip hop, one thing that you'll commonly see is rather than authentic barbecue, you'll see something like legitimate barbecue because they just almost Google translated the word. They've also done a lot of portmanteaus, so they've taken things like office and hotel, and they've combined those words together to be oftel. So obviously that's not a word that we use here. And then they also commonly use something like hand phone rather than cell phone, which can be difficult for non-native speakers to all of a sudden be hearing that Korean English